Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us. I know I got some messages that this was a little bit late notice for some folks, which I appreciate you even considering it. And we definitely appreciate the time. So what we're going to do today is just review. I sent you all the presentation last night. There haven't been too many tweaks since then. But we're just going to review kind of a couple of changes that we've made since our meeting last week that we'd like to talk about tonight at the board meeting. And administrative team, if there's something that I forget or something you want to add, please just jump in. So I'm going to go ahead to the presentation. Oops, Shelly, can you give me screen sharing? Great, thank you. Can you all see my presentation? Great. Okay. So, oops, I don't know what that is. All right, so a lot of things have stayed the same. So I'm going to kind of quickly run through some of these slides, unless there's anything in the introduction or those first few slides that anyone has any questions about. We added a couple of more assumptions about budgeting and the fact that we assume that we will need to be spending additional money to do what we need to do to keep everyone safe this year. There is one addition to the first bullet point on this slide, and that is what the majority of what our discussion is going to be about today. We have said that at least 20% of our students and staff will need to be or will choose to be remote on any given day or at any given time. And we know that that could be based on choice or it could be based on illness and needing to quarantine. But yeah, over this weekend and the last few days, given some of the news that we've been hearing about the changing nature of this virus and what we're learning about students and children, especially older children, and their ability to transmit the virus, we are encouraging and will be encouraging tonight for student and staff safety. Any families who can do remote learning at home, we will be encouraging them to do so, to get that percentage more heavy on the side of remote learning than in-person learning. And we've shifted our language around what will be happening in person as well. So we'll go into that in a second, but obviously, if more families choose remote, that limits the number of students that we will have in the building, which increases our ability to keep distance and to help with enforcing personal protections, keeping face masks on, et cetera. So any thoughts or questions on that before I move on? Okay, I'm not watching the if people have hands raised. So if you do have hands raised and somebody notices it, just go ahead and interrupt. We've added a slide about what we will be presenting. And so this presentation is the recommendation of the administrative team as of today. And we emphasize that because we know that things are going to keep changing, right? That's part of our assumptions. This process will continue to evolve and it'll be a dynamic plan. Well, I have to look at these transitions. They look weird. And what the board's role is in it is that obviously the board is our representative stakeholder group of the communities. And we look to the board for feedback and critical questioning. There are portions of the plan that they will need to approve, especially budgeting concerns and financial issues, allocation of personnel. But the entire plan and the plan that we've developed together as a team does not need official board approval. So we won't be going through a vote tonight, but we are asking for our board's support. We'll go through the calendar adjustments. Those look similar to what we talked about last week. And this one is kind of a big one. So this is where we get to encouraging students to stay remote if they can. We are going to be shifting our perspective a bit to make remote learning the foundational learning platform for all of our students. We want the majority of our time and energy in terms of curriculum and instructional programming to be devoted to creating and implementing a robust and effective remote learning experience. And the reason for that is because we know that at any given time, any of our students will be, some of our students will be remote, and we know that there is a high likelihood that our entire district will be remote at some point, given the fact that we as we know, we closed down with no cases. And we know that there will be a threshold at which we will no longer be able to have students in school and we will have to go remote. So we are again emphasizing that remote learning will be the foundational platform for the experience this year. And that results in some consistency for all of our students, regardless of where they are. The curriculum being the same, the learning management system and interaction there being the same, grading and accountability. We had a bullet point about our hybrid standards-based report card. We know that some parents are looking forward to that, that we talked about in the spring, and then having access to the same software and programming for our students, regardless of where they decide to go. So the choices we are giving our community are renamed a little bit in light of this change. Enhanced remote learning would be the full at-home experience, right? So students are at home, remote learning with enhancements based on the feedback that we received in the spring, which we'll go through a little bit later in the presentation. And then the in-school experience we're calling facilitated remote learning, which means that as we are encouraging families to take advantage of the remote learning option if they can, we realize that not all families can do that. And so if they cannot, or if they don't feel comfortable doing that, then the students will be coming to school to have their remote learning experience facilitated by a teacher in school. And the reason for that little change in wording is because, again, we want to emphasize that remote learning piece, that Google Classroom, Zoom platform, those ways that we'll be interacting with our students will be the same, regardless of if they are at home or if they are with us in school. And we are going to be offering the option for parents to, if they would like, have sort of a hybrid situation where sometimes remote learning is happening at home and sometimes kids are coming in school to have it facilitated in school. And parents may choose that for a myriad reasons, we don't know, but we would like to offer them that opportunity if we can do it. And the big if with this whole plan is where our community falls out and what they choose. And we won't know that until after Thursday, the 24th, when we send home that form and the survey form. Oh, and the reason for the last bullet point is the fact that, there is some concern out there, not just in our community, but in other communities, as boards of education, it's all happening this week. A lot of them have happened this week or will be happening next week. There's a lot of concern over boards discussing, the idea of having people back in person while they are still themselves having meetings virtually, right? So the leadership of the district needs to really model what we anticipate that we will be doing for students, and that will be happening for our August. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that will look, based on the facilities that we have, but we want to address it for the community, and because it is something that's concerning. As we're discussing bringing students and teachers back, we want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable and we're modeling those safety pieces. All right, so Heather, this was a great addition to our slideshow. I think this is a great piece. So kind of comparing those two choices of enhanced remote learning and facilitated remote learning. So looking at the fact that both are going to be a robust experience. Both will be delivered as a combination of real-time virtual and independent materials. The added component to the facilitated model is that there will be a classroom teacher in the room with the student to support that process. Both groups of students will be working at home at some point, on independent pieces, authentic learning experiences. Grading and assessment will be the same. And then obviously the big difference is, if a student chooses to be at home working remotely, there's no need for PPE, we don't think, in their house. But at school, their day will be very much impacted by the use of PPE, face masks, kind of staying in one spot because we want to, as we've talked about, limit the interactions between people. And kind of staying with that one cohort. And, we will talk about more later in the presentation why we need to keep students together, but that really has to do with not only safety, but also contact tracing once we start getting positive cases. We've talked through this before. Tracy is going to address, how students with special learning needs and challenges in both, in terms of IEPs and 504s, but also enrichment supports will be served. in both models, and the fact that we will be taking that into consideration. And then we'll go into the enhanced remote learning piece. You know these terms. We're talking through the feedback that we got last spring and the changes that we've made for remote learning. We'll go through all these pieces. I'm going to kind of escape out of here and see what has really changed. Basically, we've changed some of the wording on this piece, again, to indicate that the in-person experience will really be sort of enhanced or facilitated remote learning in school. We've moved parent certification of wellness up front because even coming to the in-person experience, this is an added component that parents are going to have to support us with. We'll talk through why we're asking for self-certification and the fact that, we need parents' help with this because our kids will come into close contact with each other prior to getting to school. We will have students who will be on the bus, who will be walking together to school, who may be carpooling, and we have to have parents support us with certifying that their students are asymptomatic before they become in close contact, because as a district, it's going to be very difficult for us to go out and do symptom screening prior to any of that close contact. So we need them to help us with that safety piece. We'll go through our confirmed COVID-19 case procedures, which haven't changed. We'll talk about the school day again, which hasn't really changed, that those hours would be the same that we talked about last time. And then we moved up general student and staff safety precautions to the top. Before we talk about different precautions we'll be taking in different areas of each school, because obviously masks are kind of a big hot topic right now, and how we'll handle that. Face coverings, face shields. Jay will be talking a little bit about the plexiglass trifolds that we've ordered, the ways that we'll be cleaning the buildings and disinfecting. I appreciate Kathy has been helping me with my verbiage here around the difference between sanitizing and disinfecting, which they're two different things. And so fixing our language there. And then we'll go through again, which you've seen, essentially what we're going to be doing in each room, each portion of the building. We've added a slide about how COVID is impacting our budget, which we don't have total numbers on yet, but Jay will be talking about how he's tracking that and how we will be presenting that to the board on a regular basis, along with any changes to this plan. Asking for flexibility. This is an additional slide after talking with our board a little bit about, making sure that we have a process for how we will deal with quick change. And, kind of the way that the team will kind of come together to deal with even those quick changes where that'll cause us as a district to pivot. The fact that we will need to take some time to just understand the issue at hand, communicate and educate the entire community, plan our response, communicate that, implement, ask for feedback, respond to that, and evaluate the results. I am going to be talking about how the Return to Learn This group will continue to meet, but I do want to reassure you that if you feel like your time is up, I get it, and you want to, rotate that seat to somebody else, we'll be giving options for that too at the end of the summer, just if you feel like, there's enough to do and I'd like to hand that torch to somebody else, I would understand. But as a group, we will continue to meet throughout the year to make sure that we're doing the right thing and we don't need to make any adjustments. We will put that full Return to Learn document on the web tomorrow. It's going to be a view-only Google Doc that will be updated regularly. We'll notate when those updates happen. We've revised our form. We have it available in English and Spanish. That will go out by school messenger to all families who have registered on the 24th. And we'll put some information on our website about this for the families who haven't registered. But I think, Tracy, right now we have over 700 students registered. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. We're actually almost to 800 now.
Yeah, that's great. And there'll be some options for as if there are issues that, maybe a parent registered for transportation, but they need to change that, that'll be an indication on the form so that we can get back to them and communicate. We'll be doing our Q&A on the 27th. And then this final disclaimer at the bottom of, if we get our results back and they're significantly different, like we have, 80% of our families opting in to school, we're going to have to look at our plan again and see what we need to do. So with that, we'll thank everybody on earth for helping us with this plan, because truly we've used as many resources as we could possibly get our hands on to make the plan, and then we'll take questions. So I'll open it up now to the team here for questions or thoughts. And I appreciate those of you who kind of looked it over before the meeting. So just jump right in.
I'll go. So this is a great plan, and thanks for pulling all this together. I know that you guys have put so much thought into this. One of the things on my mind is, how will the people who are on site be selected? I know it's dependent on how many people choose that option, and more so thinking about, like, if there's classroom teachers that are sort of simultaneously working with a group of kids that are actually remote, but also in person, I guess, are parents going to have, or kids going to have the experience that they will necessarily be with their classroom teacher?
Not necessarily. If they're on site, that's not necessarily the case.
There could be
people, yeah, so that's a great question, Jackie. So as we get our responses back, we're going to have to sort of divide our kids up into, you know, the remote folks and then the students that will be on site, and then we'll have to rebuild our class lists and talk about assignments at that point. We will try to get students with a teacher that is certified for what they need to be doing or for that grade. That's not something, though, I think we can guarantee until we see our numbers, but that will be the process.
Can that be something that's said in the presentation and or in the parent survey? Because that was one of my questions, like a facilitated teacher, does that mean a proctor, so that they're keeping sure that the kids are online watching their teacher teach, or is it their grade level teacher being there for the one-on-one or the group setting that people assume in-person means?
Yep, Carrie, I'm going to add that in to the presentation. And the answer is, I don't know, but I'll add it in as that'll be something that we'll try to do given the numbers when they come in.
On that level then, so what qualifies like the ability to stay home to the school? Like what, it just seems like such a broad thing that's not very specific for certain families to understand what would be considered okay, I guess. I just feel like some people would find the wording a little too broad and unable to make a good decision. Like, is it?
Do you mean what criteria parents should use to make their choice?
I mean, what does the district consider the ability to stay home? Like, I obviously don't work, but I have 5 kids in, 4 different grade levels. The ability for me to teach them, I don't think is going to be as possible as somebody else. And then on that note, like, how do we do the in-home timeline if we can't fit it in our timeline? So like being in person at 10 o'clock at school versus, I guess, everybody on a computer at home, being there at the 10 o'clock meeting, how doable? Because some people might want to do nighttime school then. Absolutely.
That is something that I'm going to add in. And the answer to the question is, it's up to your family. I, Carrie, have the same thing. I know that remote learning is going to be a different experience this year. And given more FaceTime and more scheduling, I don't know that I can do it for my kids because I'll be working. So that's something that I have to decide for myself, whether or not I'm going to, pursue an option like childcare for somebody to stay with my kids while they do it. Or if I'm going to go ahead and choose to send my student to school. So the answer is the criteria is up to you. And, we're trying to be as transparent as we can, but we certainly aren't going to be checking up on anybody for the reasoning why they're coming to school, because it's all a very, very personal decision. And I think when I start the presentation, I'm going to try to make a point to recognize how difficult this is, for parents and families to be in the position of having to make this choice, because it really is. And in the back of my head and my own heart, I'm trying to do the same thing for myself. But the answer is we welcome parents to do what they need to do. And that's why we're offering the opportunity for teachers to facilitate that experience for kids. The fact that it's a remote platform for everyone, really, the thought behind that is we want to make the pivot as seamless as possible for everybody. So when we go into phase 3, or if our Lake County Health Department says enough is enough, or we don't have enough staff because people are sick, even though we're going to have kids go home, we might not have a choice. At least the students will be very familiar with the schedule, the platforms, the work, what's required, and that pivot hopefully won't feel as dramatic as it did in the spring for most students everywhere. So that was the thinking behind it. But it's a long answer to say it's up to your family.
I hear you. Thank you.
Lisa, if I could, I might add only one thing to that, which is that one of our attempts here is to, regardless of where the student is engaging in school from, whether it be in a school building or from home, to align that experience as much as possible, to make it as equitable for all kids, regardless of their family situation and regardless of whether they're going to be in a school building or at home. Certainly remote learning in this new year is going to look different and feel different than it did in the spring.
That's a great point, Nate. Thank you.
And Lisa, I think one thing that for me is not mentioned, for those who maybe will switch their positioning on whether or not their children stay home based on the better understanding of the foundational remote learning being more equitable. There's not mention of the social and emotional aspect. If those families who can facilitate it from their homes, which would potentially help the greater cause, are there opportunities that we could provide and when weather permits from an after school perspective, or in that morning time for one-on-ones to come in for an in-person facilitated safe session, to if there's something where somebody to help then have information to help families, understand really what that would mean if they choose and can keep their children at home.
Thank you. That's a great point. That I'm gonna try to add these things into the presentation. My answer for that right now is that we're still working on that concept of how can we provide safe opportunities for kids to interact with each other. Obviously, when they're remote, there's going to be interaction online, but that's not what we're talking about. In school, the interactions are going to look very different. I think when I look at the Facebook posts and things about how parents are making their decisions, a lot of times I hear about that aspect of, I want them to socialize again, with other students. I think as administrators, we're struggling because that it'll be so limited, within the guidelines and the confines of the protection aspect and safety aspect. So some of the ideas we're throwing around, and this is why the slide is not very fully developed, is the extracurricular part that you talked about. There's some thinking around, can we offer more voluntary opportunities where it's not a school situation, but there's an outdoor way for kids to get together and have some kind of club experience or some kind of experience like that, where they wouldn't be, in school and tied down to all the requirements, and they could have a fun experience together. That outside of school time is a possibility. I have that written down in terms of like a one-to-one safe session. Well, that's something we'll have to think through. Students with IEPs and 504s, we are already considering, how we might be able to bring them in for additional time during that delayed start. So that's a possibility too. It's a great point. I'm going to add a piece on that.
Thank you.
Just to respond to Nicole too, might also be able to get Croya or Park District to assist in providing some of those activities where they could come over like to Artesian or something and run some kind of safe activity for kids. That would take the onus off of the school to manage everything.
Thanks, Heather. It's something we'll look into. The Park District's been great, very, very supportive. I know they have their own set of challenges, but I think that's they might be equipped to help us with that.
Lisa, I have a question related to, actually as a follow to what Jackie asked earlier. related to class lists and how students will be assigned to, the facilitated learning. Students that are in the building for whatever reason, be it for facilitated learning or if there's a hybrid model enacted, are they still just going to be every day with the same group of adults and students, or is that going to change week to week, day to day?
No, we would try to keep that as consistent as possible.
Okay.
Again, the facilitator would remain consistent as much as we can until we need to sub that person, in terms of sickness. But we would be not adding students. So that's the part of the plan that I think a lot of districts are going with as well. So if you opt into facilitated learning, then you're in. And if you have to go out for self-quarantine or whatever, you can come back. But if you opt into that remote experience, then we would not be able to have you in until the next opt-in time period, which would be prior to trimester 2. So that we could keep those groups the same. And again, that's for the tracing aspect and just limiting those interactions. It's a great question.
Could I ask, from a teaching perspective with the facilitated remote learning, if I'm able to come in and I have, as a teacher, if I have a group of students, am I helping them with the remote? Am I teaching a class at the same time synchronously? Could you kind of explain maybe the vision with that so I can get a little clarity, please?
Yep, absolutely, Brian. So we'd be looking at one or the other. So part of our plan before, a thought before that we had was maybe having this be a streaming situation where the teacher had a small group in front of them and then was streaming out to a group of remote students. We've run into some barriers with that, in terms of tech and the personal protective equipment that kids and teachers will have to, be having on, and just the ability to differentiate between those two situations. So the vision right now is the facilitator would be working with that group of students on what they needed to work on at that time. Then the teacher may have another block of time in the day where they would be, instructing over a Zoom session and providing direct instruction. So they would be two separate time periods of the day, two different activities.
I might only add to that, and back to what Lisa's already said, is it depends in large part on how many students would be in the building, and that drives a lot of this planning and preparation. If we know, for example, that we've only got 25% of our kids reporting to the building, well, that changes and impacts who might be available and how many we need for the in-person piece, the facilitated remote learning piece.
And the other question I have, similar to what Nate mentioned, if 20% or more of families opt out of the middle school, but say that number is not as large at the elementary school, is there a possibility where there could be two different plans, or are we trying to keep the district on the same plan, regardless of like the building to building percent? It's something I've been asked and I just forgot to bring that up previously, sorry.
That's a good question, Andy. I'm not sure. The answer is I don't know yet, but from what I'm learning about the two different buildings, and Nate and Kelly jump in, I'm thinking the plans are going to look a little bit different no matter what, just because of the programming that we offer for students. But that's, you guys can jump in too.
Kelly, do you want to go first?
I think I don't have a lot to add. I would say many of you are aware of the nuances or subtle or maybe overt differences between delivery of instruction, student schedules, and that sort of piece. So we are really thinking very carefully from the pre-K 3-year-old experience, up through 5th grade experience, and how we need to think carefully about all of those scenarios, and then between building to building. But the way that you asked your question is not exactly how I've thought about it before. So I do appreciate you bringing that up and putting it out there, and we'll continue to talk through it.
I would only add that yes, I think it's fair to expect that regardless of the plan brought forward, it'll look slightly different because of what's developmentally appropriate in the middle school may not be developmentally appropriate in the elementary school. So I do anticipate there to be differences, but Andy, your phrasing was a fair one for us to be considering. Certainly the percentage of in-person or the number of students that might come in could be radically different from elementary to middle. We just won't know until after Thursday when that survey is sent out.
Thanks.
I have a question just from the classroom teacher perspective. Is it possible that we would have still, let's just say, I'm going to use the number 20, a group of 20 students like we maybe typically would have, and that we would be instructing some that would be home and remote and some that would be in person, and they would still be part of like our class community? I guess the classroom community thing is always swirling through my mind, is like, we're so used to as classroom teachers having these like 20 kids that are ours, I guess you could say, not saying I own them, but that they become kind of your family. So is it possible that I would potentially be teaching a group of 20 students, but some would maybe be in school and some would be out, and whether or not I'm in or out, like, I guess is what I'm wondering.
That's a good question. I'm having a hard time saying definitively no. Because I guess we don't know, right, until we get the breakdown. But the goal will be for you to have a class that you are interacting with, that you would have a group, whether it's in person and you're just kind of facilitating that piece, or whether you're one of the remote teachers having a group that you're interacting with remotely. That would be the goal.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
I have one other question, I'm sorry, about hybrid. From the plan that was presented last week on our last call to this one, it seems like the hybrid option, I know we talked about before, would be, parents could elect, families could elect, if they were interested in a hybrid, we would contact them. Are we saying now that hybrid will be one of the 3 possible elections, or is that still only we're doing facilitated, fully remote, or hybrid is a maybe? That was one piece I just was a little unclear on, how that would be elected initially.
It's going to be the same election. So it'll be, you choose one or the other, either in or out, and then let us know if you want to be contacted considering a hybrid, because that will completely depend on where people fall out. So there might be some grades where we can accommodate it and some grades where we can't. And that's going to be hopefully pretty clear. I should add that to my notes.
Perfect. Thanks.
Will the parent option to send kids or keep them home be child by child basis, or is it only family?
Nope, it's child by child. We're going to ask parents to fill it. It's really brief. The survey is like 4 questions.
Okay.
We're just asking for, basically your email, your name, your child's name, their grade, your election for them, and then some information about transportation, before school care. It's really like 6 questions, but we are asking that parents do it for each child.
Perfect.
So that we can quickly, because we're going to have to make a quick turnaround here, like export it to an Excel spreadsheet, start calling the parents that haven't gotten back to us, and build those lists out and start to tell people what's happening. So our community was really great about the turnaround on the last survey. I'm confident that with this one being kind of the official one, that people will be on it, and hopefully we won't be calling too many folks at the beginning of August.
Lisa, I think one other thing based on community discussion that I've heard is just, obviously the opportunities that we have as a district in terms of the arts and music and are so important. But in this situation, I think a lot of the concern is on the core subjects and making sure we're not falling behind, et cetera. And I guess what I don't understand as a parent is how a schedule would look. Would it be focusing on, with a shortened day, would it be focusing more on those? How will we allocate resources from the teachers? And I don't have an understanding of that to know how to make a decision at this point.
So that's great. Go ahead, Nate. Yep.
Do you want me to field that one for middle?
That'd be great.
I think one of the things that is a little hard to wrap your head around, but I'll try and explain, is that our attempt here is between both synchronous and asynchronous instruction to duplicate the amount of time a student would be engaged in school as though it were a normal school year. So while we may not begin any synchronous instruction until 10:30 at the middle school, between 10:30 and 3:30 that synchronous instruction could be occurring, but that doesn't mean that we wouldn't, for all practical purposes, be doing school outside of those hours and in an asynchronous sort of format. So right, we can still be doing some of our fine arts instruction, and we've got some creative ideas on how to do that. But when you looked at the numbers, when you talk about a middle school schedule, and we're talking about what I would consider a modified block schedule, you're still looking at the same amount of time over the course of a week that a student would be experiencing their courses, both synchronously and asynchronously. It might not be every day, but by the end of the week, those numbers equal out, if that makes sense. And I don't know, Kelly, if you want to jump in and talk a little bit more about elementary.
Yeah, I can add in just sort of bigger picture. What we're striving to do is create space for students to engage in 2 specials each day. One of those specials would be wellness, sort of an opportunity to move, get their bodies moving. Hopefully, if they're in school, have a different kind of learning space or environment that would be outside when possible. And then engage in another special, whether it be music, art, Spanish, or a library tech opportunity. We want to make space for students to be like in school having the specials or out of school having specials. If we can have a live scenario where students are getting an experience with that teacher, I think that's a bonus. But there is the possibility that they would be sort of recorded or asynchronous. But we recognize the fact that 5 straight hours of academics or 4 hours of academics with some breaks in between is a lot, and developmentally and thinking really carefully about what's realistic for our learners. We know that breaking it up with specials hopefully can allow students to re-engage, reset, and might even sort of be a reward or something to look forward to each day. So I hopefully that brings a little bit of clarity.
Yes, thank you.
And I know there's a lot of moving pieces here, so I'm just recognizing that you guys have, while you've been in on the big parts of this plan, you haven't seen the full 44-page supplementary document that goes with this. I just was assuming that you guys had seen this because you've been along for the ride the whole time. So I think I'm going to send that out to you ahead of time so that you have more information, because my guess is that you folks being on the task force will be asked more questions. So after this meeting, I'll send you the document that's going to go up on the website tomorrow morning for the whole community. Like I said, it's about 44 pages long. There's a lot of information in it. It will be view only for you, and it will be updated regularly. We'll notate when those updates happen. But Nicole, to your point, there's more information in there, sample schedules and things like that, that I think will help parents see it a little bit better or visualize it a little bit better. So we'll send that out today.
Lisa, can I just add one more piece in? It's a minor change to our slideshow, but I think since it was talked about at our last task force meeting, just want to be transparent. We have made a decision to close the playgrounds at the elementary school. So previously we had spent some time talking about that they would be open and that would be a place for a break or recess. And we have shifted to closing those really to maintain safety and to keep the physical distancing something that we can have a better handle on.
Thanks for bringing that up, Kelly. You're right. It's small, but it's not small. Yeah.
And for teachers out there, we are thinking of other ways for students to have breaks outside and what that can look like, and really reimagining our outdoor space, whether it be walking or different kinds of stretching outside. So that is definitely on my brain as well.
These are great questions. Keep them coming.
Is this, maybe I wasn't listening, but are we sending this all out to all the parents before they make their decision? Like,
Yes.
Are these very clear what a facilitated classroom looks like versus the remote learning, just so that they're aware that it's not going to be necessarily their classroom teacher at school, that there will be, but it will still be like a scheduled day for them versus at home, there's schedules, but it's not going to look as clear as if you're in person.
So the schedule for the start times, so the short answer is yes.
Right.
They will have the document, we'll send it out in the school messenger with the election form, and then they will have a week to make that decision and turn around. So they'll have a week to read through that documentation. They'll also have the opportunity to come to that Q&A copy on the 27th.
Okay.
But I think we can try to flesh that piece out. I'm going to add that to the presentation, but I'll also add it to the document, the piece about a classroom teacher. But the goal that we are trying to do is create a very similar schedule between in-person and remote. So the start times for those synchronous learning sessions be the same.
Yeah, I guess that's just where I keep running into a roadblock, is like how to keep that school schedule when you're at home, when you're working and or you're trying to do like the in-home, but at your pace or at the way that it was. Obviously it was a little easier because there weren't live sessions. Will the live sessions be taped so that the kids that are able or need help can watch later? But then I don't know.
That's something we're thinking through. The quick answer is probably not on the live sessions. We will still make use of pre-recorded material. And this is the struggle because we know that we got very mixed feedback on our remote learning in the spring. We definitely had a lot of parents asking for more face-to-face time and more live instruction. We had a few saying it was too much, and that we want that flexibility. Myself, I'm with you in the same boat. If my kids stay home, I'm going to have to do night school, which means I have to think about how those live sessions are going to be handled. And I don't know what my district's plan is. I should have attended the board meeting last night, but I was a little bit more worried about this one. I'll figure it out later. But the point is, we get that. So there will be various aspects that will be pre-recorded and places where parents will have extra resources. But that was a big ask from many communities, was how can we make remote learning feel more like school? And that scheduled aspect of it was one piece. How can we kind of keep kids paced throughout the day so we're not, I think we got a lot of, my student was done by 9 or 10, so, and then you have the rest of the day. So building in those checkpoints will be big. But that's not to say, to Nate's point, and something we're going to emphasize is this will be dynamic, as we move through the year, figuring out what works for a group of students, how a student is engaging or is able to engage. We're going to work with folks to try to make this accessible and equitable based on the home circumstances. And we recognize access to technology and Wi-Fi and all those things can be really, interesting challenges to deal with. So the short answer is we'll work with you, but we want to respond to the feedback that we got and try to keep it as structured as possible and as similar as possible between the two.
Lisa, listening to what Carrie's concerns are and just remembering back to when this started and some of the teachers' concerns about their own children, I'm just wondering if there would be a possibility perhaps, and maybe it's too complicated, but if there were teachers or administrators like yourself who actually would be more available in the evening and the parents had wanted the evening, could there be some sort of perhaps those teachers that have their own young children that need assistance but want to keep their kids home for safety reasons as well? Maybe numbers wise it might work out where some of that enhanced remote learning could be in later in the day?
Logistically, I'm not sure. That's the answers. I don't know. But I don't know that it's not something we can explore. I mean, I think it's something we can talk about. And I do think that as we move through this and we see what our parents are asking for, what they're able to do, this is the way we need to look at this. This is a partnership, more than ever. when we go into this, we're in it together. So we can be creative in our thinking. I do want to be respectful of the fact that so many of us have so many different home situations and, personal circumstances that we have to deal with. Our obligation is try to make this work for our community. And so let's think about that, Jen. That's a good question.
I think one of the other sort of considerations that continues to come to mind is this notion of sustainability, right? And the idea that we're going to have to pivot and to shift, and we have to have a plan in place that is sustainable, regardless of what environment we're working in. And so, you know, I appreciate your suggestion, Jen, and I'm not suggesting that's not sustainable. I think it's just one of the important pieces that needs to be considered. And we certainly heard in the feedback that we got from parents is, you know, there are ways that remote learning can be improved upon, and there's some consistency that needs to be applied there that maybe didn't exist in the spring. And I think some staff had sort of reported that same sense, like let's have a better understanding of what we're all going to be held accountable for. And we know there's more information to come in that area, but the sustainability piece is important because I think most would agree COVID is not going away tomorrow. We're going to be dealing with this for some time to come.
Thanks, Nate.
Dr. Leali, if I look at the enhanced through the lens of a parent, I feel like I could still be a little bit confused because it sounds like teachers are facilitating the in-school portion. But might that be, it maybe that if you, when you flush that out a little bit more, is make it a little bit more, you know, black and white, or describe that a little bit more? Because it sounds like if my child is at school, they might actually have class with their science teacher. Or might they be facilitated going through the schedule like the kids at home, but maybe with a teaching assistant? So I think maybe that might need a little more clarification for parent. You know, if I'm thinking of it as a parent through a parent lens, that would probably be a question that I needed a little more clarification on.
Thanks, Ann. We'll work on that because I hear it. Yep. Okay,
One thing I know for me that's getting on my mind now that we're wrapping up sort of this decision about the basics of how school would look, and people who've worked with me know I'm a planner, is starting to look at this whole idea of I'm as a teacher becoming anxious about, tell me what you need me to do. I need to know what I need to do so that if I can get some things done now, when it would be more emotionally well for me to not feel crunched, to have that option, or at least just to know what's going to be expected so that I could plan if I have children like you do at home to say, oh, nope, can't do that if that's what you need me to do. So I'm just wondering the timeline as far as when will staff know a little bit better about kind of what our expectations are going to be.
So tomorrow is the first step with the faculty meetings. Nate and Kelly are going to be running faculty meetings. I know they've been talking, and I'll let you guys chime in too. They've been talking a little bit about trying to answer that question for folks now, like what can I be doing right now? And then as those plans come out, we've been working, as you know, with team facilitators and team reps on some of those logistics. And then as those plans come out, hopefully it'll start to become clearer for folks. But Kelly and Nate, anything you want to jump in on that with?
I can start. Heather, great question. And you have been on my mind because you expressed that at the last task force meeting. And I know you're not the only one. That's really, we're all just wanting to, for me, like focus energy a little bit too at times, because I think it is a lot to be thinking about. And so Nate and I are absolutely planning on addressing this at the faculty meeting with some suggestions. Thinking about Zoom and wrapping our own heads around that platform is potentially very new space for teachers to navigate, presenting authentically, and just other ways to grow our knowledge on some of the best practices with remote learning. We also have started a document on pulling together teachers who are feeling, I'll use the word passionate on particular topics as we reimagine learning in the fall. And so we hope to have some more direction on when are those groups starting, what will that look like, who will be involved, how do we navigate that? So those were a couple of things that I was thinking about for the faculty meeting. Great question. And I can totally understand where you're coming from.
And I would add to that, you know, a part of exactly why we're talking and having the conversation we're having today is to give teachers a better understanding of what the return to school would look like. I think until we had this conversation today, there was this idea, well, it's either going to be remote or in person or both. And the reality is to do all three options well, without a clear expectation of what direction we will go, just wasn't realistic. You know, we've got now at least some of a bit more of a framework to work with. I know all of you probably are frustrated by the caveats that we continue to provide every time we attempt to answer a question. You know, the things that we can control, we will. The things that we can't, we don't know. We've got lots of teachers whose kids attend school in different communities, and we don't know what those school scenarios are going to look like for the families of our teachers. So that's one thing that we can't necessarily be prepared for until we know what it looks like. But yeah, the faculty meetings tomorrow, and Kelly and I will be talking this afternoon just to make sure that we've got that agenda buttoned up. That's a big part of our focus. We'll be able to answer some questions and not others. We do know that more synchronous instruction is going to be coming, and kind of helping to define that for staff is going to be a part of that conversation.
I'm so sorry to have one more question. It came up last week, the question of like how remote learning is going to be better than it was. What's like that next level that we're all waiting for, we're going to experience this fall?
So in short, the better is trying to respond to the feedback that we got. And the majority of feedback that we got was we need more live instruction, face-to-face connection between teachers and kids. Although our community really felt they could communicate with our teachers and they felt there was two-way communication going, we also heard that they wanted more live instruction. So that was a piece. Streamlining the learning platforms was another piece, and kind of the interface between, you know, how do I find all my child's work? How do I get to a place that helps me find all the things I need to have? So we're working on a website that will be all the same for every grade, every student. So the interface will be the same for parents, and hopefully easy. We're having teachers work on that with our new tech director to design a website that's easy to navigate. Moving to Google Classroom as one platform, as opposed to trying to navigate both Google Classroom, Otis, Seesaw. We had a few different, which were good for their own purposes. We're going to try to streamline that for parents and add some functionality to Google Classroom that will help us, you know, shore up the gaps between those programs. And then the other piece that I think we've been talking about as a team, you know, some of it was just as a result of the guidelines that we were operating under, right? So when we closed down in the spring, it was very clear to us from the State Board of Education, no harm done here, guys. Don't hold kids accountable. Don't be making grading decisions based on what kids can do and can't do. And that to some felt good, and to others felt like a lack of accountability. So for better, for worse, there will be more accountability for students. There'll be more communication about, you know, what assignments are missing, and kind of keeping that traditional grading thing going, that accountability piece, which for some may not feel great, but we definitely got feedback that parents wanted higher expectations and that accountability to come back. And, you know, the other piece for us is just keeping a focus on the learning moving forward, which was not necessarily a focus for anyone in the spring. Again, that was under the guidance we were under. You know, be cautious with new material. We don't know which students are with us and which aren't necessarily. We're going to be moving forward with a curriculum. We're going to be assessing students and providing feedback. And we're going to try as much as we can to make this as authentic as possible. And what I mean by that is it's not all going to be through the computer. You know, we want kids to be back engaging with writing and engaging with, you know, their own fine motor skills and reading and doing some projects and things that don't require interaction with an app or a computer or a device for, you know, some great length of time. So that's what I want our teachers to be able to focus on. And that's really where the shift came in of, you know, to Nate's point, we can't do everything really well. We can't do in-person really well as a different experience and really build this amazing remote situation that everyone will be in at some point and make the two seamless. It's too much to try to tackle. especially given the guidance has been just changing nonstop since this all started. So hopefully the decision to focus our efforts on building that remote piece and responding to the needs of our community is a good one. And it gives our staff the time and focused energy and resources that they need to do that, and to build a system that works the best we can make it work for all of our community.
I have something. I was just thinking from like a grading perspective, thinking through like an equity lens. Are we going to have some sort of maybe professional development or teacher conversations about how to be careful that we're not penalizing students who are potentially struggling or not able to complete assignments for things that are out of their control? Because I do know that we have students that, you know, the situation that they're in kind of guides the way that they're able to maybe interact with us remotely or even in person. So to be sure that we are kind of taking that into consideration when giving grades or providing that assessment feedback.
Yes, we will continue to talk about that. And I'm not sure what the professional development looks like, or if it's more conversations as we move through this development process, but yes, we will continue to. That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. Yep.
Lisa, I have a question about the facilitated in-person remote learning. Just so that tell me if I understand it correctly. The kids that are in school doing their remote learning in school with a facilitator, they're still getting their synchronous instruction over their device from their classroom teacher. Is that correct? But then there's a teacher in the classroom, you know, making sure everyone's doing their assignments or helping if there's a question type thing. Is that right?
That's correct. So who asked the question before about, was it Amanda, about having a class? So there will be that primary classroom teacher for students to get their remote instruction. And then there may be a facilitator as an added piece to that puzzle for the kids who come into school to facilitate that group. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
So we're gonna try to keep that remote piece very consistent. You know, obviously people get sick, you know, so there may be people that have to shift there, but the goal is to keep it consistent. But yeah, for the in-person, there'd be two. There'd be the one doing the remote piece and then the facilitator in school.
And so just as a follow-up, those kids that are in a classroom, like for example, I have a 5th grader. If he was there may also be 4th graders and 3rd graders in the classroom, right? And it doesn't really matter because they're all getting their instruction over their device from their classroom teacher.
I don't know if
correct?
that's true. I think we would try to group same grade kids together so that we wouldn't necessarily have to have it completely independent. You know, we can think about ways that we could organize that class if they're all the same grade to be having some different, you know, maybe we project it instead of them looking into their device. If they're all the same grade and kind of having that happen, then we can do some of those things. Again, some of it's going to depend on where our parents choose.
Thanks.
Anna, I might only add to that, and this is more specific to the middle school, but I think applies to elementary as well. If you're kind of thinking why, one of the things that this enables us to do is to be far more flexible and responsive. So in a scenario where you're doing direct instruction from a specific teacher at the middle school, it does not take many teachers to have to go out because they're sick or a family situation or a self-quarantine before your system fails to operate because you no longer have enough staff to be in person with those kids. This creates a bit of a safety net for us in the sense that we can continue to deliver consistent instruction in a way that works for kids and for staff and is not so dependent upon that critical number and not dropping below that critical number of staff in the building.
Thanks, Nate.
So we have 2 minutes left. What I'm hearing from the group is we need a little bit more explanation on the facilitated versus the enhanced remote learning. So we're gonna try to address that within the presentation tonight. A little bit, we need to get some in there about SEL. Potentially just how this might impact the buildings differently. Some questions about fine arts. And I have the other questions, but those are the kind of the trends that I'm hearing in terms of what we need to really focus on tonight. I appreciate all the questions. Feel free to email me if there were ones that you wanted to ask that you think about later, or anyone on the team. You can ask anyone on the administrative team. I I do want to thank you for coming today. I mean, it's invaluable for us to be able to run this by a group and have you kind of, tell us what's confusing. And, as we move through this and folks are asking you questions, because I'm sure they will, please encourage them to reach out if they have questions, to read the document. It's really big and long, but there's a lot of information in there that will be helpful for them. And, just encourage people that we're trying to be flexible. We're trying to adapt to the needs of the community and do the best we can for Lake Bluff right now. So again, let me know if there's anything. Appreciate you guys. Tune in tonight. It's going to be exciting.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.